Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the briefing room. Yes, indeed, yours truly, Eric Kavanagh, is here, and I'm so excited for the topic today, folks. A BI portal, a smooth path to business value. Yes, that's an acronym. I had some fun with that. We're going to find out how. We'll be talking to Marius Moscovici, or Moscovici, if you use the Italian pronunciation, and Mike Smitheman of Metric Insights today. Very cool company that develops a BI portal. Well, what does that do? So what is a BI portal? Basically, it's a way to synthesize your existing insight assets. So all the information systems that you use, a data warehouse, for example, OLAP cubes, things of that nature. This allows you across different tools to synthesize your decision support. So think about large organizations, especially. They may have 2, 3, 5 data warehouses. They may have 10 different tools that they use. Lots of options these days. Alteryx, Teradata, all sorts of analytics companies out there. There must be 50 out there total of proven business intelligence tools, if not 80 or more. Well, large organizations have many of those. So how do you achieve governance? How do you get a synthesized view of what's happening in your organization? A BI portal gives you a layer of abstraction through which you can view all these different information assets, all these different insight systems. Basically, you can coalesce your decision support. That's a good idea for several reasons. So I came up with this acronym, a path to success. That means practical, accurate, thoughtful, and holistic. So what does practical mean? Here's my good buddy Immanuel Kant. I've always been a big fan of philosophy, and he has the categorical imperative. Act only on that maxim which you can at the same time will as universal law. Well, in the rule of the game we have here with business intelligence and analytics, I can tell you that users love their tools. So going in and thinking you're going to rip and replace, even if the tool that you use, you know is much better than the tools that they're going to use, they want to use their tools. What's more, there's time and effort and resource and value baked into those tools now. So in some cases, they've been around for 3, 5, 7 years. You don't want to lose all that. You don't want to lose that historical perspective by just porting over to another system. And anyone who's ever done such a movement knows that you lose quality, you lose integrity when you do that. You lose context. It's sort of a lossy format change, if you will, when you try to grab something from one system and import it into another. So we have to be practical if we're going to be successful with business intelligence in the modern day. And I think the most practical perspective is to, again, synthesize everything that you have. Build some functionality into that portal so you can help users find what's relevant to them, so you can certify certain reports. It's really helpful in a whole different variety of ways to do this. So practical, that's one key. Well, what else is important? Accuracy, right? You have to be accurate with information systems. One of the big challenges that people show up at meetings with different numbers for the same topics, the same metrics, like sales, like costs, et cetera. So you want to be accurate. How can you do that? Again, with a BI portal, you've got this layer of abstraction. You can pull information from all these different systems and then really get that strategic view. And what's more, over time, you figure out who the really trusted sources are. So trust is critical for insights. If people don't trust the data, they're just going to start looking elsewhere. Many times that's kind of how we got into these problems of what they call shadow IT. But shadow IT is good in a lot of different ways, quite frankly. Shadow IT is good because wherever you see it, that means they were solving some sort of business problem. So I would even argue that Netezza, of course, so I actually knew the CTO from Netezza, Foster Hinshaw, for quite some time. Netezza was kind of like a shadow IT system. Companies got tired of waiting for their turn at the enterprise data warehouse, and they said, oh, we'll just build our own. They bought a box, they threw some data at it. Well, then you've got a silo of information that's good for the people using it, but what about everybody else? So for that team, it may be accurate, but for the broader business, maybe not so much. So how can you deal with that? How can you, again, synthesize a view from all these different systems? Well, a BI portal comes in very handy. And yeah, I took this photograph, by the way. I was there when that happened. And yes, that is 5 bullseyes. One bullseye, then a double bullseye, and then the guy hit it inside the dart for another double bullseye. So I actually heard that happen. I didn't see it, but I heard it. I saw the first one, second one, turned around, heard the third one. I was like, holy Christmas, that guy knows how to play darts. Thoughtful, right? These are my 2 cats now, dearly departed. But T.S. Eliot has a great poem where he talks about, it's from the old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. He says you might find a cat in rapt contemplation of the thought of the thought of the thought of its name. Well, that's being thoughtful. And what's interesting here, the analogy to business intelligence and analytics in general, decision support, is that you really need layers of abstraction to better understand things, right? So what are some layers of abstraction? Metadata is a layer of abstraction. Any visualization is a layer of abstraction. Some sort of collaboration layer is a layer of abstraction. You want to know what other people are using. You want to know what other people are looking at, driven by metadata. Well, again, if you have a BI portal that weaves together all the different information systems that you're using, you can then start tracking which key metrics are showing up in which reports, sharing that information across the organization, helping people find their way. You can't get value from analytics if you're spending all day trying to find the right report or writing a report that's already been written or is 80% written. This whole collaborative side of the equation is really quite important. What I've always loved about this concept is in the poem, again, think about what he's saying. The cat is thinking about, it's in rapt contemplation of the thought of the thought of the thought of its name. Well, a name is a layer of abstraction. A thought of a name is another layer of abstraction. The thought of a name is another layer of abstraction. And you get all the way up to the thought of the thought of the thought, and you're pretty darn deep in contemplation. This is a thinking person's game, analytics and business intelligence. The whole purpose of this is to understand your business better, to get to the root causes. And you really do need these layers of abstraction to kind of find your way, to wend your way towards the truth or what is meaningful to you at a given time. Okay, so holistic, you have to see the big picture, obviously. You always want to be focusing on the future. This is something I heard a political friend of mine say, which I thought was kind of cynical but funny. He said, good politicians are always focused on the next big accomplishment. You've never quite gotten there. You're always trying to get there, because once you're there, you can rest on your laurels, and that never works well. But see the big picture. And people love big ideas, but they need attention to detail, right? So what does a BI portal do for you? Again, it allows you to sort of wax philosophical with your data. It allows you to envision the big picture and look to the future, but it also has this track record, and you can see what's happening. You can see who's using what and when and so forth. And also, the waves of innovation will continue. There have been tremendous advances in this space of analytics and business intelligence now for a number of years. I mean, just amazing when you think about the scale of these new solutions, what they can access, how quickly they can ingest data, what they can do with the data. So the point being, if you have a BI portal as your window into your world of information systems, you can pull in the latest and the greatest, and in no way does it disrupt your existing assets, what you've already invested in, and almost immediately can be coalesced with everything else that you're seeing in your organization. That's a big deal. So moving forward, governance, I love this all and nothing. So think about it. You cannot have data governance if you have 5, 10, 18 different access points to information systems. True data governance must go through one lens, one powerful enough, clean enough, clear enough lens that you can see what happened, that you have audit trails for where things have gone, and certification. If you can give the trusted data imprimatur, for example, because you know who vetted it, you know which metadata it uses, you know what the process looked like, all that audit trail stuff can get baked in. That's very, very powerful for any team that wants to govern their data and be able to prove later that they had in fact governed their data. So what's this going to do? It's going to improve morale in your organization, folks, I promise. So what do I say? Future-proof your analytics and BI program with a BI portal. You will simplify, amplify, and qualify your data initiatives and products. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Marius Moscovici, founder of Metric Insights all those years ago. And these guys are not new. They've had this stuff out for a decade. So good stuff. Marius, take it away.
Eric, hello everyone. So let's see, my screen.
Yep, I see it. Looks good.
All right. Well, so thank you for that, all that context. So I'll give you kind of a little bit of an overview from our perspective, the thing that what justifies a BI portal, and what does it do at a high level, and then I'm going to hand it over to Mike Smitheman, who is going to give you a demo so you can see what our BI portal looks like. So with that in mind, I wanted to start with a premise that really, for all of us, our BI systems tend to be a mess. And Eric was talking about that path, creating that path for your users. Really, it's the case if you look at most organizations, and we've talked to many of our customers about this, they'll find that perhaps 10, maybe 20% of the content in their environment is actively used. The rest of the stuff is things that were created a year or two ago, fall into disrepair. It's not uncommon to see a situation when there's 3 or 4 or 5 different versions of the exact same dashboard that has been created out there because there have been different authors, or there was a slightly different purpose for the dashboard where it was retooled, but then now there's what appears to most users to be like duplicate content. And if you think about that, instead of having, if let's say only 10% of the content in your BI system is actually actively used, that means that for a typical user, when they're going in and they're looking for something, 90% of what they find is not useful, right? So that instead of having that clear path to them to get to the content, that path is littered with these huge boulders, and they've got to climb over them and navigate through it, and it's an exhausting process to find what you need and know what you can trust. And it gets sort of worse and worse every day, because in most organizations it's much easier to add new content than it is to remove. If you consider it, to add new content, all you have to do is bring up a dashboard, make a change, do file, save as, rename it, and now you've got a new dashboard. To remove it, something, you've got to have a meeting with a group of people to figure out, is this really something that is obsolete? Maybe it's not being used now, but maybe it'll be used in the future. How can I be sure about that? And human tendency for most analysts is to really resist removing things, especially when they're not sure who created that and is it still useful in some way. So for that reason, there's this sort of gravitational pull towards entropy, where more and more clutter is generated in your BI environment. And that issue is really exacerbated further by the fact that, as Eric mentioned, most organizations today have multiple BI tools, right? Gone are the days where a centralized BI team made all the purchasing decisions for most organizations. It's usually the case that there are various satellite groups. Each of them has got their own set of SaaS products. Those have BI tools within them. They maybe have selected their own BI technologies, their own data marts out there. So it is the case that this path that's there for the users looks more like a maze with mostly dead ends, right? Where you not only have to figure out like which technology am I using. I know we use both MicroStrategy and Tableau. Is this a MicroStrategy or a Tableau report? You not only have to do that, but you also have to, once you figure it out, the tool, then go find the particular report that you want within that tool and know that you can trust it. And so that siloed approach, it just creates a whole new layer of complexity for the casual business user that has maybe 1, 2, 3 minutes to really look at analytics and needs to get to what they need to find and take action on it very quickly. So the end result, right? What happens when you have all these different systems, all this clutter, all of this, a tremendous amount of content that's not necessarily being actively used, is that users become overwhelmed. So that end user, that business user who only has a few minutes a day to spend on analytics, instead of spending that day, really that time in valuable analysis, thoughtfully looking at the things that are going to make a difference for them, they're instead spending most of that time looking and feeling overwhelmed with the content that's there because they can't find what they want. Or if they do find something, they're not sure if they can trust it. Like they're saying, just Eric said, I know there's these 2 dashboards and they're showing slightly different information. I'm not sure, like which one of these is correct, right? And that completely undermines the trust that they have in business intelligence and the analytics that are there. And as soon as that happens, likely not to come back and look at anything because they just throw their hands up and say, well, I can't trust any of this, so I'm just going to make a gut level decision. And that lack of trust basically then drives low usage and perpetuates a lower engagement cycle. So it's not uncommon to look at license utilization across BI tools and find, most organizations, people find maybe 50%, maybe less of the licenses that they purchased for their users are actively used, and the rest are sort of going out there unused, where people are not looking at analytics at all. And that's all because of this factor, that the consumption model just doesn't fit how people really want to take and consume this information. And as a result of all that, then you as a BI team leader, you're stuck with a paradigm where it's very hard to show ROI for the significant BI investment that you've made. And this is, I think, a problem that has become even more serious now in the COVID era, where budgets are getting tighter. There's more and more scrutiny around how each BI team is spending their money, and every line item in a budget. Not unusual for many of our customers are telling us today when they do rebudgeting for their BI teams, they are zeroing everything out, and everything has to be rejustified. Every resource has to be rejustified. Every technology investment has to be rejustified from scratch. It makes it that much harder as a BI analyst, as a BI leader rather, to make that justification happen if you are in fact have low utilization. So how can BI portals address this issue? Well, there's 4 pillars to this particular to this technology providing a solution. The first thing is, as Eric mentioned, pulling everything in one place. Addressing that problem of if there's 17 places where I need to go for the information, it not only is it not governed, but it's unmanageable. So a BI portal provides a single pane of glass through which you can access all the content, irrespective of what technology is being used and where that particular report resides, in the cloud, on premise, wherever it is. And doing so in a future-proof manner, where if you decide tomorrow to add another technology into your BI stack, you can do so and you can just fold it in nicely into the same architecture. The second thing that a BI portal does is it allows for distribution of content to users. So if all you do is create a portal, create a solution where people have to go to find the content, if they've got to go to one place rather than 17, well, you've made it a little bit easier, but really you haven't solved the problem that's fundamental, the problem where users just don't have enough time to consume the content. What you want to do is you want to be able to connect them to the content that matters most to them in such a way that every day they get up in the morning, they open their email, and then they're going to see the 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 reports that matter most to them in their email, and they can just scan them in a few minutes, be up to speed. If there's something that looks alarming, click on that and then go and do the in-depth analysis. But be up to speed with very little effort. So thereby deliver a lot of engagement, even though there's not a lot of time that users have to spend with the analytics. The third critical component of what a BI portal needs to do is to uncover critical changes. So if there are 20 dashboards that I may want to look at any given day because I'm interested in, maybe different parts of the business, and there's different ways of slicing that information, what I need as a busy end user is a solution that doesn't make me go in and open every one of those dashboards, and for each dashboard, change filter values and explore to figure out what is actually going on, because that's never going to work. I don't have the time for that. What I want as a business user is for the right analytic to come to me. The best insights should find me. So I would want to say, tell me which of these 20 dashboards should I look at today based on the fundamental changes in the data, right? And think about that. If you look at a dashboard today, it might be useful to you. You might learn something from it. If you look at that same dashboard tomorrow, if the data hasn't changed in a fundamental way, if the trend is exactly the same as it was yesterday, that is a waste of time. You only want to look at an analytic when it's showing you something new. So the BI portal solution that you put in place needs to be able to surface or bubble up those specific changes that require action from your users. And then finally, Eric mentioned that we need to be able to have a way to monitor usage and manage the overall cost of your BI stack. So understand across all the different tool portfolio that you have, what is the usage? Which reports are being used and which are not? You want to be able to so that allows you to basically, weed the garden, right? To take out the content that is not used, to figure out where's there really ROI within the tools case you're using, and where does it not exist, where you might want to make some changes. And then justify that ongoing investment that you're making, both at a level of tool as well as for the analysts. What are analysts spending time on? Which reports are they developing? Are the reports that they're developing actually generating engagement, or are they developing things that, well, they look interesting and they're beautiful visualizations, but in fact, when you look at what the business is using, there's not a lot of value that's being generated. So being able to drive that process through the usage statistics that come from the BI portal is a critical pillar of the solution. So with that in mind, let me hand it over to Mike, who is going to then show you an example of all of these concepts in terms of how we at Metric Insights address these particular issues.
All right, and folks, don't be shy. Send your questions in at any time. We'll queue them up for the Q&A. Take it away, Mike.
Thanks, Marius. Thanks, Eric. So yeah, let me spend a few minutes taking you through Metric Insights solution to the BI portal that Marius and Eric have been talking about. We're going to cover those 4 pillars that Marius touched on. So the organization, the distribution, the uncovering of critical events, and then tying it all back to understanding how users are using content within your organization. And so what you're looking at on the screen is the Metric Insights, what we call catalog or library, for want of a better word. And this is looking at an instance of Metric Insights that is plugged into a number of different data sources that Marius was talking about. So really anywhere in your organization that has content that's important for your business users. And so each of these tiles that you're seeing on the screen is essentially coming through a plugin to a particular tool and is publishing a piece of content that is relevant and interesting to your users. And so that can be obviously the BI tools like Tableau or Power BI or Click or Cognos. Could be data coming from databases or reports from operational systems. Again, the concept is that we can connect to any tool and then allow you to publish the relevant content through. And if we take a look at a few of these tiles, we can talk about what's actually happening here. So, for example, we may have published a Tableau workbook, a Tableau dashboard that we want to make available to users. If I click on that tile, what our plugins are doing, a number of things. So Eric mentioned the concept of metadata. So through our plugin, we're able to recognize what content exists on these underlying systems. And when they get published, we pull in a level of metadata, obviously the report name, when it was last updated. We even capture preview images here that gives the users sort of a visual representation of what the dashboard looks like each time it updates. And then if a user clicks through into that particular piece of content, we're taking them to the live dashboard that they've selected, in this case Tableau, embedded within the Metric Insights portal. To the user, they didn't have to know necessarily where this piece of content exists. They didn't have to know necessarily that it's a Tableau dashboard. They're seeing a visualization that they were interested in and relevant to them. And they have the full functionality then of what they would get if they found it in the underlying tool. By embedding it in the portal here as well, we're able to give them a cohesive experience around this content regardless of tool as well. And that manifests itself in a number of ways that we'll touch on as we look through the product and the demo. But it's the ability to do things like bookmark particular views that you look at often as it's related to this particular dashboard. As a publisher of the content here, we talked about the holistic view of information, being able to attach relevant context to the dashboard, so things like release notes or help around definitions of what's in there. And Eric mentioned collaboration as well, the ability to have a common collaboration layer at the user level where people can discuss the content, again, regardless of the source it may have come from. So if we go back to the home screen here, so publishing content from these tools, again, whether it's Tableau or whether I'm drilling into a Power BI piece of content, a Power BI dashboard, to the user, they get this consistent experience. They don't have to know where the content comes from or what format it's baked in. So we can publish content from our different analytics tools. In order to get this holistic view, we also need to include any other relevant content within the portal. And that may be in the form of, say, documents. There may be, PDFs or Word documents out there that have relevant information. We can publish those as tiles as well. We can't get away from spreadsheets. There's probably workbooks and spreadsheets out there that have relevant information. We need to make sure we're including those as well. We can even publish native reports within Metric Insights, so we can actually connect to databases and pull in data and visualize it directly within the tool as well. And then finally, and Marius spoke about this, making the data as relevant as possible to the users and as easy to consume for the users. We also have this concept of metric tiles as well. And they're identifiable by the ones that you see the numbers on here. So say this daily sales tile. Through our plugins, we can pull out these high-level KPIs, these high-level indicators for users that track the relevant metrics that they're interested in. We track those over time, could be every hour, every day, every week, every month, by different areas of the business. So in this case, I'm looking at sales by our different regions. And in the guise of sort of bubbling up what's important to the users, the Metric Insights platform is actually tracking how these metrics are changing over time. We look for highs, lows in the data. We run moving averages against the data set. We look for statistical outliers within the data that may indicate, across the different dimensionality that you have, areas that may require attention from your users. And we can actually, as you'll see a bit later on, alert users to these particular issues. So, we find statistically significant values, highs or lows in the data that we may want to send alerts to users on and get their attention. Or even allow users to create their own alert rules against the data, compare it against thresholds, historical values, targets, whatever it might be, so that the system can start to tell them when to go and look at a piece of content, rather than, as Marius said, relying on them to come in every day and figure out what's going on. So the sort of first step in solving this issue through a BI portal is collecting all this content that's relevant from your different systems, publishing it in a way that makes sense for the users, organizing it in a way that makes sense for the users. So down the left-hand side here, you'll see that I've got a category, a hierarchy. Think of it as almost a file system for your content that is common across all your data sources. So as Marius said, one of the challenges is, in the current paradigm, I've got to figure out which system the report exists in. Then I've got to navigate through the folder structure or the hierarchy within that particular system. By taking these tiles and putting them in a common hierarchy, it makes it easier for the users to be able to navigate to what they're interested in. And also provides this search paradigm. So think of this almost like a Google search for your data, where a user can come in, enter a particular search term. It suggests common search terms that users are looking for and common assets that it finds. And if I run that search, it's going across our catalog of content, across the different tools, ranking results as you would expect from a search engine, but a search engine for my data and my content in this scenario. So step one, again, is cataloging this content, getting it all in one place so users don't have to play this game of hide and seek. And so, I've kind of been logged in as an administrator here with access to everything. Let's switch across to another browser. Hopefully that should come up there. So now what does this look like from an end user perspective? So we published our content. I'm now logged into the portal here as Avery, a typical end user. She's actually responsible for sort of a sales region in our demo data here. And immediately you'll see, you know, as we talk about relevancy of data, she's getting a restricted view of the world here. So based on her permissions and her role within the organization, immediately she's getting access to a subset of that catalog that we've been talking about. So that certain categories of information are relevant to her, certain tiles within those categories are relevant to her, even certain slices of the data. In this case, she may be responsible for a particular region, Canada. And not only that, when she opens content, so if we take this Tableau dashboard that we were looking at before, when she opens content, we may want to pre-filter that content to her particular region in this case. And so I mentioned briefly this concept of bookmarks when I first opened this dashboard. When a user opens a piece of content, any piece of content that perhaps contains country, we can pre-filter that content directly to the region, in this case, that she's responsible for. And again, save her time every time having to navigate through filters and understand what it is she needs to see. So to Marius's point, when you've got a couple of minutes every day to look at data, you want to make it as relevant as possible. Within her catalog as well, we want to add as much context to the data as well. So it's not just about the numbers, the concept of sharing announcements, either about the data itself. So at the top here, you'll see I've got a couple of announcements, or we've spoken about trust of the data, making sure we're communicating any issues with systems or data that we're pulling into the portal. You know, we don't want a scenario where we know our server is down for a particular BI tool and all the business users are ringing us up to say we've got a problem. We know about that already. Or worse, they're taking decisions on data that is old because we've had an issue with updating the data that night. We want to communicate anything out to the users, and we can do that through the concept of these announcements at the top. So we've looked at this, this organization, this catalog, this library view of content, getting everything into one place. But Marius also spoke about the fact that even if you do this, relying on users to come in every day and access and find this content is challenging. You know, they get distracted, they don't do it. What happens? They miss stuff within the data. And so we also need different ways of distributing this content out to them. And the Metric Insights portal has a number of ways of doing that. The first is staying in the portal itself, but creating this concept of what we call sort of landing pages or portal pages that bring together the most relevant content for a particular type of user. So as I mentioned before, Avery is in here as sort of a sales manager in our demo world. And there may be content from multiple systems that she is interested in tracking every day. So rather than relying on us to bring those tiles into the portal, have her go in and look at each separate thing every day, we can actually publish those different pieces of content into a single page for her. So in this case, I've got the metrics at the top that she's interested in. We're alerting her to any issues with those metrics. We're pulling out exceptional data that she might be interested in. So, areas where sales drop more than 50% day over day. We're pulling in the critical dashboards, regardless of tool that she might be interested in. So I have one coming from Tableau here, but equally below it, there's a Power BI dashboard that she's interested in. And in a single page, I can give her the most relevant content that she needs to look at every day so she doesn't have to hunt and find it. And whether that's sort of an example like this, or bubbling up perhaps critical metrics to your executive team, pull these out of your dashboards, put them on a page for the management team so it's in their face, so they don't have to go and hunt for this stuff every day. And if they want, drill into the underlying details to figure out what's going on. Another way we can distribute content is obviously via email as well. And distribution for us can take two sort of paradigms. There's the concept of self-serving against the data, so picking and choosing as a user what I want to receive every day, and we can also do it on behalf of users as well. But one example is using this concept of what we call favorites. So as a user, I can basically curate at any point in time the content that I'm most interested in and that's most valuable to me. And so by dragging a tile or clicking on a star, I can create my own personal set of favorite tiles. And what that does is give me a shortcut to that content, but it also instructs Metric Insights to actually start tracking that content on my behalf and doing things like sending me a daily digest of what's important in my world. And this is an example of that. So what is the digest doing? It's looking through my favorites every day. It's telling me which metrics have moved the most since I last looked at this email. It's pulling me in a summary of the metrics that I'm interested in and alerting me to any issues that may have happened there. And it's also pulling in any dashboards that I have in my favorites, again, from potentially multiple tools that have updated since I last looked at this content. And so we don't necessarily want to send everything to the users every day. We just want to focus them in on what's changed since they last received this particular email. And so, in a minute or two, I can scan the content that's relevant to me. I can see what's changed. And if I spot something that's interesting that I want to go and look at in more detail, I can obviously drill back through into that content and take a closer look at it and do my analysis in a much more targeted way than I was before. We also mentioned the concept of alerting right at the beginning, if you remember, when I was looking at the metrics that we spoke about. And I can be alerted to critical changes within the data as well. So there's oftentimes mission critical metrics that you want to keep a handle on. And for example, we may be wanting to track sales for Avery here. If we see a drop in sales that's significant, we may want to immediately send to the sort of related dashboard. Again, we're using those preview images, those images that we collect to the dashboard, in this case, pre-filtered to her particular region, and immediately an email or even on a mobile device, wherever is relevant, we can send that alert and focus her in on the issue at hand that we found, so she doesn't have to go hunting for that every day. So let's finally touch on the concept that Marius spoke about keeping the content relevant and interesting for the users. So something that is critical in any portal solution is that we're tracking and understanding how people are engaging with content over time. And sort of the key to delivering relevant content is, as Marius mentioned, not overwhelming users with content that's just not relevant or stale or not useful. And so as a publisher of any content to the portal, I need to understand how it's being used, is it being used, and how relevant is it to my users, so that I can either promote it to them if they're not aware of it, or retire it if it's something that's not useful to them. So the Metric Insights portal is actually tracking all this engagement behind the scenes around who's accessing what and how they're interacting with all this data and all this content. And as a publisher of content, I can start to see over time, what's most popular, what's increasing in popularity, what's going unused, what's decreasing in popularity. And across my different data sources, across my different categories of content, even down to a particularly granular level. So we can start to, if I just pause this to explain it, we can start to see usage patterns for the particular dashboards that we're publishing. So in this case, what this visualization is showing us is for this Tableau dashboard that we've been looking at in the center here, if I play this forward over time, it's showing me which users or groups of users are coming in and accessing this content, every day, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And the users that you see that are sort of bouncing in and out here are coming back on a regular basis and looking at this particular dashboard. The ones that are fading out to the outer rings came in once and have never looked at it again. And so as a publisher of this particular dashboard, I can start to see who's finding this content interesting, who isn't. Should I be promoting it, out to Grayson again because, he looked at it once, maybe he forgot about it, get some feedback from him. Why didn't he find this useful? What could make it useful to him? So understanding these usage patterns, even down to individual behavior, like what are people searching for within the portal that is finding content, or what are they searching for? What are the keywords they're using that isn't finding content, so that we can use this to better understand how we structure the portal, how we tag content so that it's easily discoverable, and how we make it much easier for users to find content. And then finally, Marius spoke about the sort of license utilization of this. As he mentioned, we often find that organizations are paying for licenses in the underlying tools for their users because they don't necessarily understand who is using content, who is using these tools, and how they're using them. And so by the fact that we're capturing all this engagement and all these statistics, we're able to understand what that license utilization is. So out of everything you're paying for a particular tool, and out of the different levels of licenses that you're investing in, who is and isn't using those tools, who isn't using their license to the fullest capacity, so that you can start to either drive engagement with these tools so that you can justify the spend, or if this particular type of tool isn't useful to certain users, then there's no point paying for them. Let's turn it off. Let's find a better way of presenting data to these users in a way that will make more sense and that will get them more engaged with it. So that's kind of the whirlwind tour, I guess, of the Metric Insights solution to the portal. And I guess to summarize at a very high level, all the content in one place, make it easily searchable, but then don't rely on users to come and find it. Make sure that you're pushing out that relevant content to people and understanding what's relevant over time. So I guess I'll hand it back to you, Eric, and we can move on to the next section.
Got to unmute myself there. Good overview. I like a whole bunch of different aspects of this, and we have some great questions. Go ahead and share that screen again, if you would, Mike, just so people can kind of see something to sink their teeth into. So I love that you've got all these different tiles. Can you talk about what does the process look like as you're onboarding, as you're connecting to different systems? You mentioned a number of different types of information systems we tap into. What's the spectrum? Is it any database, a data warehouse, and how does it all get brought in?
Yeah, good question. So we spoke about right at the beginning this concept of data sources or plugins. For Metric Insights, that really falls into two guises, two types, and you just mentioned them, Eric. We can connect to databases. So through any sort of JDBC driver that you can upload to the platform, we can connect to any SQL-based database. And in that case, we can create those metrics and native Metric Insights reports that you mentioned, that we mentioned for alerting purposes. But then we also maintain this library of plugins to other systems like the BI tools, like big data sources, like common web applications or SaaS applications like Salesforce or Jira. Anywhere, again, that we are connecting through the APIs that exist within these systems to be able to understand what content exists, publish them, capture images, understand the metadata that's related to them. So when you set up Metric Insights, you're basically saying, okay, what systems do we have in our organization that have relevant content? We set up these plugins and make the connections to those systems. And then what the plugins do, if we pick on Tableau again, is when we make a connection to those systems, so in this case, we're connecting to a Tableau server, when our plugin starts to read the object model of what is available in terms of dashboards and reports or tables or whatever it might be on that particular system. So in this case, the workbooks and worksheets are available. And once we have that metadata, you can then start publishing that content as tiles within the system. So in fact, if I just go back to the front page here and let's edit this Tableau tile, what's happening here is we're connecting to that Tableau plugin, and now we have access to all the dashboards and reports that are available. I can pick the ones that I'm interested in and publish those out through the portal. And so generally the way this is set up is, in order to keep this relevant and only publish the relevant content, I'm not necessarily publishing everything that is available on that underlying system. Marius mentioned the duplicality of what's available. There's lots of different reports that aren't interesting anymore. I can pick and choose the relevant ones and keep it very relevant within the portal itself.
Yeah, and there's this concept of federated queries, which we're seeing more and more of these days because the tech is getting us there. But what's interesting is you're providing a sense of that, I suppose, because you're pulling together multiple views from different systems driven by metadata. So even if you're not generating what someone might call a pure federated query, nonetheless, you're providing a visualization and drill down capability into source systems that kind of accomplishes the same objective. What do you think?
Yeah, it's sort of a federation at a logical level, at a level of abstraction kind of higher than the data federation. And there is some combination that happens here as well at a data level, where you do things like, oh, I want to put data quality type checks in the system, where I'm going to be looking at my data in Tableau and I'm going to be checking with it actually totals that balance out to what I have in my data warehouse. So we have that kind of a use case, as well as in some cases actually integrating to tools like Denodo and other places where the data federation occurs. So we work with those layers as well, where they exist, to be able to pull data from multiple systems in a single pass with SQL.
Very cool. And I love the landing pages too, because again, and I talked about these layers of abstraction at the top of the hour. Some of this information is pretty complex and very dense. And so unless you find a way to distill it or represent it in a consumable fashion, it's just not going to be worthwhile to the business, right? So these landing pages, I'm guessing there's a certain art and science to how you develop those over time. Are there any sort of templates that come with the system, or is there training? How do you figure out how to do those properly?
Yeah, there are a number of templates. So like this is one template that you're seeing here, kind of the operational high-level KPI template's very common, where I want to be able to start with the high-level numbers, know where things are trending, know what's green, what's red, and then kind of go to that next level, whether that be a metric insights visualization or a Tableau or Power BI or whatever BI tool you have that's sort of to drill down into more information, and then surface up high-level insights there, like you got the supply chain thing. That's sort of one example. Another very common example is the ability to do those combined content across multiple data sources with shared filters. So that's I don't know if we can show you that for a moment. This is a very common thing. So that you can imagine if I'm functionally, maybe I'm working in a sales group and I want to be able to, I've got five or six different sales reports I like to look at every day, but I want to pre-filter them and then see them all and interact with them all live. Here you can do that. You can switch between different reports. They can even be different tools, and then you can carry the filters forward as you do that. So all of these models, these are just sort of two examples, but all of these models, all these templates that we have are really built around saving people time. And then to the extent that there isn't an existing template that exactly fits what a customer does, this is all built with HTML, JavaScript, CSS, the standard technologies. There's an editor to do that. So we can easily drop in new designs, new templates for customers when they're necessary, or they can build it themselves if they've got that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think, and not to get too philosophical on us all here, but I think everyone knows that they need to be using data, but I think the dirty secret in a lot of organizations is most people do not want to be data analysts. And as much as we say we're going to provide business users with the self-service tools that they need to be able to analyze data, the reality is they're never going to do it. And so by presenting data in a way that they can consume it in a very short period of time, and we're talking minutes, not hours for sure, That's the way that they feel like they're using data and they can get something valuable, rather than saying, hey, here's a really powerful tool. You can slice and dice any which way you want. You can filter and move between the data in any which way you want. Reality is they never do it.
That's really funny. That's a really good point too. And we've talked about BI for the masses. I remember talking about that with Wayne Eckerson in like 1998 or something, which is a long, long time ago. But now we have the technology, and I think this BI portal is an excellent layer of abstraction for being able to synthesize all these information assets as we've discussed. But what I find so interesting too is you're really giving voice, Mike, to a reality on the ground, which is that there are many business people who just want that piece of information, want that insight, want that alert to do their job better. They don't want to be in the data all day, every day. They want to be there just long enough to know what to do next, and thus to be data driven. And what I find so cool is that we keep raising the bar as an industry because we're learning from various channels. Think about how Slack has changed our behavior. Think of how even something like Twitter changes our behavior with trending hashtags and things of that nature. Oh, what's happening now? Well, these are useful, interesting alerts that become flags for action. So to your point, and there's a great question from an attendee, we are working with a very large group. How is it possible for us to more effectively collaborate via this portal? Well, by using the portal, again, the more you use it, the more you're going to have people who naturally understand it and curate, and they're going to become the shepherds of useful information, right, Marius?
That's right, and typically in large organizations, I mean, we have organizations with 70, 80, 100,000 people in them using this as an enterprise portal. Typically, it's not just one team that publishes all the content. There's a center of excellence, so it's got a federated model, right? So it's a center of excellence that has the knowledge and the wherewithal to train other teams, and then you bring on sort of these satellite groups of what we call power users, and they're the folks that are responsible for their area, and they're curating their content, and they're promoting their content, and they're certifying and making sure that that area of the garden is well kept up and has the analytics that are relevant to the business users. So that as you said, Eric, business users want to be thoughtful, but they don't want to spend their thought on which of these dashboards do I want to look at? How do I find the thing I want? What they want to spend the thought on is, okay, now I know this information. What do I do about it? And so that kind of model where you really keep everything clean in a federated, distributed fashion with a center of excellence group works really well at scale with tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of users.
And as it relates to collaboration as well, so something we didn't touch on in the demo here, but if organizations are using tools like Slack or like Microsoft Teams, excuse me, we want to make sure that we're integrating the data into those conversations as well. So in fact, the Metric Insights portal has an integration with Slack and Teams where those searches that I was running through the portal itself, you can actually carry out those searches within Slack, and we will serve up the results to a Slack channel or into a Slack conversation. So again, technology aside, you want to be delivering data where people are having discussions that data can help it in, and make sure that you're adding context to that conversation that is happening.
That's right. You want to do it in a way that is secure, right? So that if I go to Slack and I search for content, I'm going to find the same content there as I would here in the portal. No more, no less. If it's something I don't have access to, I can't share that. But if I do have access to it, then I can interact with it right there. Or in some cases, we're finding now with the increase of collaboration tools like Teams and Slack, things are being pushed to users actively. So rather than get something in email where it's going to be buried, I want to push this piece of content. This is a key thing that when there's whether it's alert driven or something that regularly comes out, push this into a Slack channel where everyone can then just jump in and collaborate on it right then and there and have a discussion. So that's also a very common use case.
What I love how tactical that is too, right? Because wherever it meets road, people are in their jobs, they're doing things. We're seeing this trend towards single sign-on. You even see it in some of the big web giants, right? Sign in with Google, sign in with Facebook. That sort of trend, that's one of these interesting sort of macro trends that's reshaping how we do our jobs. And the bottom line is people don't want to have to bounce from this system to that system, log in over here separately. Oh, what's my password? All this stuff, especially if you're working from home all of a sudden. Right? If you were working in the office, now everyone's working from home, someone who has a BI portal like Metric Insights already set up, well, that was the no-brainer, right? They just sailed through that straight quite smoothly, right, Marius?
Right, right. It's all integrated with your single sign-on and enterprise level, and it's exactly right. Your access is passed along appropriately through single sign-on to whatever application you're using, and as well as if you're accessing it from Slack or Teams or so forth. So it's the same security model. Also, we do synchronization at the security level through LDAP and Active Directory, so that you inherit the security that you would have for the underlying tools. So you don't have to typically maintain a completely separate security model. Metric Insights, you just sync up to the model that's already been built around these tools so that people get the access that they expect to get.
Okay, good. We have a number of good questions here. We don't have time for them all, but I'll pass them on to our presenters. Here's a very particular question, but it's a good one. So I'll throw it over to, I guess, maybe Mike and then maybe Marius if you want to. So as regards the underlying computed metrics like periodic changes, trends, averages, alerts, et cetera, exceptions, are those displayed in the metric tiles stored in Metric Insights tables? And are they actually computed at query time from underlying data sources? I think the answer can be yes, right, Mike?
Yeah, essentially that's what's happening. So as the data source is updating on the back end, we're incrementally reading in new information into the metrics within Metric Insights. We're then running the alert rules against those metrics and managing the distribution of any alerts that users are subscribed to. So we're sort of this layer on top of the data or on top of the underlying tools. And those metrics can be sourced from anywhere, right? You may be pulling a metric out of that Tableau workbook that we've been looking at because you want to track that and alert off of that and only drive people back to the Tableau workbook if we find something unusual. So yeah, that level of abstraction is happening within Metric Insights. We're managing that common alerting layer across all your tools.
Yeah, and there's an event model that controls when we go get the data. It can be as frequent as every minute, or it can be once a day, once an hour, and there's governance around that so that you can make sure that you're getting data at a point where it's gentle on the source system and so forth. So but yeah, so we can think of Metric Insights as a caching layer for all of this information.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. And you mentioned this, and we're seeing this as well. The long tail of COVID-19, there's going to be a lot of impact just falling. Other shoes are going to be dropping here, I think, for the next 6 months to a year. So even though sunsetting applications is very rare, you have this great ability to track usage and map that back to cost and see exactly who's using it and even the patterns. And I love slider bars and time as a dimension, like being able to sit there and watch time as a dimension around reports geared around a particular metric or use case or division or whatever. That's so useful to kind of understanding the flow of your business. And the flow of your business is really what happens, right? Like cash flow, for example, you want it to be moving. That's the whole idea. Cash is king, especially in an environment like this. So my point is that being able to track that usage and know who's using it, what value you're getting, that's going to be extremely helpful for organizations that need to make some cuts, right? That need to figure out where to move, what to invest in, what not to invest in. I think those decisions are coming soon, and what you offer out of the box has a very powerful story in that regard, right, Marius?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's just the reality today that everybody has got to justify their meal ticket, right? And every aspect of what you spend, and there's more and more scrutiny because the uncertain times budgets get tight, and so you've got to be able to build a good ROI case for everything in your BI stack, and you've got to be able to and you need to do it proactively. You can't wait until your senior management comes to you and says, okay, well, now it's budgeting time. We need to cut your budget. Where are you going to do it? We need to have a model up front. You're proactively through looking at these usage stats across all your BI stack, across the different resources that you're having, understanding where are you really getting value, where are you not, and how do you take that scarce pool of resources you have through the analysts and make sure you're applying them in a way that just generates so much value to the business that it becomes an absolute indispensable part of the organization.
And cost aside, what is the if reality is less than 50% of your BI tools are getting utilized, if that means that 50% or more of your organization is not looking at data on a regular basis, what is the lost opportunity there, right? Around being able to make better data-driven decisions that we've all spoke about since time gone by.
Well, here's another great question from an audience member. Most people like to look forward, and we spend a lot of time strategizing and thinking, and we want to justify things with data, and that's all great. But sometimes you really should look backwards. And I love this question. The attendee asked, can metric insights identify the staleness of content based on metadata comparisons? That's very interesting, because where you don't look often tells us much about what you're thinking is where you do go look, right? What about staleness and knowing what's not being used and maybe getting insights about whether or not it should be used? What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, that's very much a part. I don't know if you saw in Mike's, first of all, a few things. We always look at the collection of data that we can actually mark when things are stale from a perspective of just simply have not been collected. So just like that, it can be marked right on the tile, so you know whether the dashboard or the report you're looking at is current or not. But furthermore, as far as usage, staleness from usage level, I think that's one of the key levers you need to pull. Is the only way to declutter your environment is to look at, what is on that page. If Mike scrolls down, here's all the unused files, right? So for each of those cases,
Wow.
that's something that you, as Mike said, either if that's content that should be used, then you need to promote it to those users or discuss with the users why they're not using it, and then make either adjustments to the content or it's just maybe it's an education process. If after that it's still not being used, that needs to be removed so that you can declutter the space, so that then when people are going in, they're actually finding the content that's useful to them rather than just being overwhelmed with clutter.
But BI inherently is an organic beast, right? You can't expect to, and this is, I guess, why we're in the BI mess that we are, right? You can't expect to implement a BI tool and roll it out on day one and never touch it again, right? Because data changes, the business changes, and so inherently having stale content is not necessarily a bad thing. We just need to make sure we get rid of it or promote it or replace it with something that's more useful. And so it's critical to sort of keep the ball rolling as the business changes. And the last 3 months have been a obvious example of how things change and how you have to measure the business differently probably than you were 3 months ago.
Yeah, and I'm reminded of something you said earlier, which I think is really critical, and that is the push versus pull, right? What's interesting is we were in this entire push-based world with issuing reports all the time. Then with queries, of course, you're pulling data. The internet has changed how we think. We have an attendee talking about Google, saying Google does not work behind the corporate firewall. I mean, you can go out and buy the search boxes, etc. But the point is, sometimes you do need to push the data out. So in this stale data list here, there may be cases where you just need to push the data to a certain person. But to your point, wait and see. If that still doesn't work, well, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, right? But it is worthy of note that sometimes you should not expect people to just find things. That's the whole point of going down this road. Sometimes you do need to push it, and you need a system that allows you to easily do that and then to track the efficacy of what's happening, right, guys?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, people don't know what they don't know. You're publishing new content all the time as well. So, it might not be stale content, it might be completely new content, and people just aren't aware of it, right? So you can't rely on them to find it. You need to promote it. And then again, as you just said, track the usefulness of that content.
And if you think about it, Eric, there's all these models today, right? In sort of content management, content promotion, and media space that there's a lot of sophistication when a new piece of content goes out there, how it gets promoted. Yet in the BI space, it's really kind of like, oh, it's there, people will use it, right? And there's just not so we need to get a lot more sophisticated, I think, as an industry about making sure that that we're grooming that garden, or thinking of the BI landscape, that we have less not a static thing, as Mike said, but rather a living garden of things where you constantly have to weed and constantly have to nurture and build a high level of engagement.
That's right, weeding and nurturing, those are good. And one last question I'll throw over to you. You even mentioned the term, Marius, at some point. One thing that really excites me about this approach is you enable yourself to leverage new technologies, new information systems as they come online, as they become available. You don't have to pivot someone away from their environment to use the new stuff. You just connect it into the portal, and then they get whatever is new through the window that they've been using, right? Because people like their tools, they don't like to change too much. So if you can get them into this environment where they're sharing and collaborating and using and curating, well, guess what? The new hot item comes along, the shiny new object, you can just plug it in here and bam, you're off to the races, right, Marius?
That's right, and that's exactly the point. And as well as if you need to transition from something, right? In a particular tile, maybe you've decided you're going from this BI tool to this other BI tool because you're seeing a lot more engagement with another tool or whatever. You should be able to make that transition, make it seamless to the user, right? They don't have to click to someplace else to find the content. It can be even the same tile with the same name. It's just taking them and showing them it's slightly different visualization. They don't really need to care. Most business users, they don't care whether it's MicroStrategy or Click or Tableau or some JavaScript visualizations you created yourself. They just want to get it the information and consume it the same way every time and make it easy for them. So that's really that.
See, that's a really excellent point. It's a good thing to close on here too. It could be the same tile, right? Like people don't care if, wouldn't it be nice if, for example, any alternator could fit any car, right? Then you wouldn't have to worry about getting this version, that version, et cetera. I mean, yes, we have 3D printing, but it's still expensive to do that kind of stuff. But this is another excellent aspect of a layer of abstraction, meaning the view is what people get used to. It doesn't matter which system we're plugging underneath to get there, as long as it's an accurate view. So the point is it's very stable from a user perspective, right? If you're not going to be disrupting them by changing the name, by changing where they look, all that stuff takes time. And so if you can simplify that and get people, again, trusting this source of information, then underneath the cover, you could be changing things out as needed. I think about like Bitly's, like the first time I ever came across a redirect server, actually was at the Data Warehousing Institute, and I was like, how cool is that? So I can, because some of the older webinar technologies, you would get a different URL for the archive as for the live event. Well, you could, if you could change that target URL, it's basically like a key value store, right? Just change it underneath. It gives you the flexibility to not have to change a landing page. That stays the same. What's underneath it can change. Again, it's all about usability, getting people to use this stuff, to trust it, to move forward, and over time it just gets better and better, right? Mike, I'll throw it over to you for final comments.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's as I said a few minutes ago, it's an evolving beast, right? And you know, I think the key in all of this is what are we trying to do? We're trying to make it simple for business users, as I said before, who don't want to be analysts, you know, and they shouldn't have to worry about where all this stuff is. So let's give them something very simple, very consumable, and make it as easy as possible for them.
I love it. Well, folks, look them up online, Metric Insights. We do archive all these webinars for later viewing. You can usually check out the archive within about 30 minutes. So kudos to GoToMeeting for that. They figured that one out. And send me an email, info@insightanalysis.com. We want to know what you want to know. We're going to have these folks on a radio show too sometime next month. So check out the DM radio schedule at dmradio.biz. And with that, we're going to bid you farewell, folks, gearing up for a great 4th of July weekend. We'll talk to you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.